So yeast products are those products which rely on yeast as the raising agent. But we need to start by defining what yeast is. So under yeast products, write yeast. Yeast, our first subtopic. I'm sure you've seen when we are making bread rolls, we use yeast, and it takes long time. We don't just mix and put in the oven, no. Like making a yeast product has got various processes. So yeast is a living thing. So let's write this definition of yeast. This is a single cell microorganism. Single cell microorganism. So yeast is a living thing. This is a single cell microorganism. This is a single cell microorganism. And in the right conditions, it ferments. Ferment inaganda. So in the right conditions, it ferments, into brackets, reproduces. So kuferment kwa yeast ni ile kufura, na hiyo inakuwaga ni kureproduce. It's like it is reproducing other living things, other molds or other yeast cells. So it ferments, that is reproduces, producing carbon dioxide. Producing carbon dioxide, which aerates the product. Producing carbon dioxide, which aerates the product. Ku-aerate ni kuweka air. So when a product is aerated in a raise, just the same way a cake rises kwa sababu ya baking powder, it is the same way bread will rise, ama bread roll will rise, ama donut will rise because of the carbon dioxide which has been produced when yeast has fermented. Now, down there write examples of yeast products. Examples of yeast products. Examples of yeast products. The first example is buns. Bun. B-U-N-S. Hizi buns ziko na examples. So buns, e.g. Chelsea buns, when you look at the practical kwa utaona hizo recipe zote. Chelsea buns, cross buns, Chelsea buns, cross buns, fruit buns. We call them fruit buns because it is simply a bun but iko na fruits, like vitu kama vile unaonaga scones ziko na raisins ama sultanas. Those are the fruits we are talking about. Fruit buns, etc. Another product number 2 is bread. Bread, e.g. bread rolls, rye bread. Remember when you talked about rye kwa starch, you said iko na unga and inaweza bread. Rye bread, etc. And the other product number 3 ni donut. Donut. I know some people call donuts duff nuts. What is it there? Donuts. So those are 3 examples of yeast products in the kitchen. The things that we cook using yeast. And the things that use yeast, they do not baking powder, or rather, we cannot substitute yeast for baking powder. For example, we cannot say, I wanted to cook donuts na nitatumia baking powder. Even if you give them the shape of the donut, because the name nut comes from ile shape yake hiyo round na it has a space there at the center. Even if you use the baking powder na utengeneze hizo, those ones will remain to be mandazi and not donuts, because donut must be a yeast product. So donuts, breads, buns, etc. We have many examples of yeast products. Now, write a subtopic. Conditions necessary for yeast to reproduce ama ferment. That is a subtopic. Conditions necessary for yeast to reproduce. Conditions necessary for yeast to reproduce. Unaweza weka stroke to ferment. Now, if you can recall a time that you made bread rolls in the kitchen na zikakosa kutokea, like they don't raise ama zina harden ama zinakosa kutokea zikiwa zinakaa vile zinafaa kukua, that means yeast did not reproduce. So either one condition was not there or some step was not performed. So let's see the conditions necessary. Condition number 1 is warmth. Lazima temperature ikuwe warm. That is why when we are creaming the yeast and some liquid, whether milk or water, we make sure the water is not hot or the milk is not hot and it is not cold. When the liquid is hot, we usually say that it kills the yeast. When the liquid is hot, it will kill the yeast. Remember tumesema yeast is a living thing. So yeast will die if we use hot water. And when we use cold water, yeast will take too long to ferment. So if it was supposed to take, let's say, 1 hour, it will end up taking 2 hours because there was no warmth. So 1 is warmth. Hyphen. A good temperature is between 22 to 30 degrees. A good temperature is between 22 to 30 degrees Celsius, and the best is 28 degrees. A good temperature is between 22 to 30 degrees Celsius, and the best is 28 degrees Celsius. So anytime that you are making a yeast product, you have to make sure you are even the condition under which you are making it. That's why ukimix unaenda unaekelea pale juu ya oven, because it is a warm place, not hot, not cold, so that you can be having a favorable temperature for the yeast to be able to raise. Another condition, number 2, moisture. Now we all know moisture. It is dampness, and this moisture in a yeast product is usually now brought about by the liquids that we use, either water or milk or a mixture of both. So for moisture, let's write this. The yeast needs to be creamed or dispersed. Ukiangalia recipe yako inakwambiaga disperse the yeast in the liquid. So the yeast needs to be creamed or dispersed in a liquid. It needs to be creamed or dispersed in a liquid, which may be either water or milk. Which may be either water or milk. Full stop. The other statement about moisture, the liquid should be in the temperature. The liquid should be in the temperature. The liquid should be in the temperature of approximately 37 to 38 degrees Celsius. The liquid should be in the temperature of approximately 37 to 38 degrees Celsius. So that is moisture. We cream, we don't just pick the yeast na tunachanganya na mara moja. No. We first mix it with the liquid, either water or milk. The other condition, number 3, food. Yeast needs food. We've already said that yeast is a living being, so it will need food to survive and to grow, to be able to reproduce. Food. And which food does it depend on? Now, yeast feeds on starch. Chakula ya yeast ni starch. That is why it will be used to make the flour rise, but the same flour, the starch yenye iko kwa unga na sukari yenye iko hapo, that is the food that yeast will feed on. So let's write this. Yeast requires food for its reproduction. Yeast requires food for its reproduction, and the food is obtained from the starch. Yeast requires food for its reproduction, and the food is obtained from the starch in flour and sugar. From the starch in flour and sugar. So it will require food for it to grow. When we've defined yeast, we've said it is a single cell microorganism. So it is an organism, it is a living being. And for it to grow and reproduce, it needs to eat. So whatever it is eating is what we are calling the food, and that food is starch. The last condition, number 4, time. Time. If you can remember how we made bread rolls in the kitchen, we don't just mix and put in the oven. Kuna processes like when you cream the yeast, ikiwa hapo umemix na maji ama na maziwa, you pour it on top of, you make a well pale kwa bakuli yako, you pour it there and you do not mix. You cover with a kitchen cloth, unaenda unaekelea pale juu ya oven until you see it bubbling. After that, that's when you pick it. Una mix, una knead kama ile unga ya chapati, unarudisha pale tena until it doubles in size. You take it back, una knock back, una knead inarudi the primary size. You divide kama ni bread rolls ulikuwa unatengeneza, unazipanga pale kwa baking sheet and you don't put them in the oven. Unaziweka tena pale juu until zi raise tena. So hiyo yote ni time. So yeast takes time. It needs time to grow and to reproduce. So let's write this about time. Enough time is needed to allow the yeast to grow. Enough time is needed to allow the yeast to grow. Full stop. Another statement. For the first proving, unajua anytime tukiona the term prove, huwa tunajua kuna yeast inatumika. So what is to prove? Kuprove ni ile kuraise ya yeast product, kama vile bread huwa inafura, ama hiyo unga ukitengeneza ya yeast ina double in size. That is what we call proving. So we don't call it just raising kama ile ya keki. We usually say that the cake has risen. Now with yeast, we say it has proven. So for the first proving, 1 to 1.5 hours is needed. Tukisema first proving, tunamaanisha ile yenye sasa umeneed unga, umerudisha, unaekelea pale juu ya oven mpaka double in size. So when you are letting it double in size, hiyo ndio tunasema inafaa kutake 1 hour to 1.5 hours. And the second one, kuna second proving. Second proving ni ile yenye umechukua uka knock back, uka divide kama ni bread rolls zako ukaekelea kwa baking sheet na uweki direct kwa oven, unaweka tena ziraise ndio uweke kwa oven. That is the second proving. So I've said for the first proving 1 to 1.5 hours is required, and for the second proving 45 minutes are required. And for the second proving, second proving 45 minutes are required. Now, let's have another subtopic. Main ingredients in yeast products. Main ingredients in yeast products. Main ingredients in yeast products. So when we are looking at main ingredients in yeast products, we are trying to look at, apart from the yeast itself, what else is used? What else do we use when making yeast products? And because we call them yeast products, obviously yeast is the main ingredient. So let's have number one, yeast. Number one is yeast. Yeast is our first ingredient. Hyphen. It produces carbon dioxide gas. It produces carbon dioxide gas. Which aerates the dough. Tumesema kuaerate ni kuifanya erase. It produces carbon dioxide which aerates the dough. And produces the flavor texture and color in the finished product. It produces carbon dioxide gas which aerates the dough and produces the flavor, texture and color in the finished product. Full stop. So what are we trying to say here? We are trying to say that when we use yeast as an ingredient in yeast products, iko na uses zake. So this yeast is the main product. It is the one which causes the product to raise. But it also has other uses. Like which one? Like contributing to the flavor of the product, the texture of the product, the final outlook, even the color. That is why ukiweka excess yeast, utasikia ile taste. The bread roll will be bitter. So that is flavor. Pia ukitumia hiyo mingi itakuwa bitter na pia itapasuka. It will overproof mpaka ipasuke. That is texture. Huko ndani kutakuwa na parts zenye ziko dark, some black parts. That is color. So when we use yeast as an ingredient, we are using it to aerate the product, to bring the flavor, the texture and the color of the final product. Ingredient number 2, flour, unga. Flour. Now remember, I have said that Yeast depends its starch, inakula starch. And the starch comes from flour and sugar. So when we are looking at the flour as an ingredient, iko na some purposes. One, it will produce food for yeast in that yeast product. And again, it is like it is the base. Hatuwezi kuwa na yeast product bila unga because it is the base or the major ingredient. Now, let's write this about the flour. Flour contains starch. It contains starch, which is a source of food for yeast. It produces starch or it contains starch, which is a source of food for yeast. Another statement about flour. During baking, the starch gelatinizes. During baking, the starch gelatinizes. When I say gelatinizes, what do I mean? When we talked about flour, we said it has gliadin and glutenin zenye zikiongezwa na maji they form gluten. So hiyo gluten inafanya ina stretch, but haiwezi stretch forever. When you put it in the oven and this time it has a raising agent, ita expand up to the maximum point it can expand. So that is what we are calling gelatinizing. Becoming very rigid, like expanding to a point of rigidity such that it cannot, in a set, iwezi expand more than that. That is what we call gelatinizing kwa unga. So during baking, the starch gelatinizes and gives rigidity to the product. Gives rigidity to the product. So when we say it gives rigidity to the product, we are trying to say it makes the product firm, inaipatia body, and then the product becomes firm. Another ingredient, number 3, water stroke milk. Water stroke milk. And why am I saying water stroke milk? It is because you can use water on its own na ukose kutumia maziwa, or you can use milk ukose kutumia maji, or you can mix. You can use a mixture of water and milk. Now, the purpose of water stroke milk, it is standing in the gap of moisture. Remember tumesema moisture is a condition which is required. So what brings in this moisture? This moisture is introduced by a liquid, and the liquid here is either water or milk. So let's write this hyphen. These provide moisture for the yeast to grow. These provide moisture for the yeast to grow. Full stop. Another statement. Water, now this one is specifically for water. Water is necessary for the following. Water is necessary for the following. Roman 1. Even distribution of ingredients. Even distribution of ingredients. So that is one importance of having water. It will help in distributing the ingredients, even the ingredients like the yeast, like salt, like sugar, hizo. Roman 2. It hydrates the proteins in the flour. It hydrates the protein in the flour. It hydrates the proteins in the flour. Tushasema once you introduce liquid ama maji kwa unga, that is when unga inashikana na inaanza kustretch, inakuwa elastic. So it hydrates the proteins in the flour. And Roman 3, it is needed for gelatinization. Tushasema it gelatinizes the starch. It is needed for gelatinization during baking. It is needed for gelatinization during baking. It is needed for gelatinization during baking. So I've already said what is to gelatinize, and I can repeat. I have said when we are baking flour, wheat products, they will expand up to a point of, like they will expand to the maximum, up to the point of where now they cannot expand further and they cannot go back to how they were. So at that point, we say it has gelatinized and set at that point. Yes, reverse. You cannot reverse the process and you cannot continue the process. So that is what we call gelatinization. So those are the uses of water. Let's write a statement about milk. Milk is necessary for the following. Milk is necessary for the following. Roman 1. It gives the product a more browner crust. Brown, inakuwa more browner. It gives the product a more browner crust. Crust ni hiyo coating ya juu. A more browner crust than water. A more browner crust than water. So ukitumia maziwa na mtu mwingine atumie maji without any milk, the crust, the outlook of kama ni bread rolls zitakuwa tofauti. Kuna yenye itakuwa more brown kwa sababu iliwekwa maziwa na ingine itakuwa brown. The other one, Roman 2, it reduces the chances of the product going bad. It reduces the chances of the product going bad. Tukisema going bad tunamaanisha ni staining ama kuharibika. So in other words, it acts as a preservative for this dough product, for this yeast product. And the reason for that is because we know that milk has fats. So the fat in milk plus the protein in milk yenye inaitwa casein. There's a protein of casein. It will help to preserve this dough product for a longer period. So that is why it will reduce the chances of the product going bad because of the fats and the casein protein in milk. Now, what is the bottom line? So what we are supposed to do with yeast products, we are supposed to look at our liquid. How much liquid do we need? If it is 500 ml, then we decide 250 water, 250 milk, tuna mix. Kwa nini? So that we are able to maximize on the benefits of both water and milk. So that is purposely why it is written water/milk. So unless you are baking a bread product for someone who does not take milk, it is advisable that we mix milk and water. Ingredient number 4. fat. Ingredient number 4 is fat. Now you'll realize majorly in baking we call it fat because you can choose or you can have various types of fat. You can have cooking oil, you can have margarine, you can have butter. So ziko tofauti. So the general term ni fat. Hyphen. This acts as a raising agent. So in a yeast product, margarine or butter or whichever oil you use, it will act as a raising agent. Full stop. Another statement about fat. It gives the bread a better volume. It gives the bread a better volume. Now when we say a better volume, this one is closely related to the raising agent. Haitakuwa imeshikana shikana. Itakuwa iko na air spaces and it will be fluffy as it is supposed to be. It will not be soggy and dull. Another point about fat, it has a tenderizing effect on the crumb. It has a tenderizing effect on the crumb. Crumb is the filler. When you kama vile tunasemanga bread crumbs. Bread crumbs ni pieces of bread. So, or bread which has been crushed. So when we say on the crumb, tunamaanisha the texture, the feel of the bread. It will be tender, it will be soft ikiwa na mafuta than ile yenye imebekiwa bila mafuta. So it has a tenderizing effect on the crumb. Another point about fat. Now, the reason why I'm giving you these things as points is because you can get various questions. Like you can get a question telling you, discuss the uses of fat in yeast products, or what is the importance of fat in yeast products. So that's why I'm giving them in point form. You can be asked, what is the use of water? Why is water important in yeast products? Why is milk important in yeast products? So majorly, when we are looking at the main ingredients in yeast products, it's like we are looking at each ingredient and its uses in production of yeast products. So let's continue about fat. The point about fat. It helps in browning the crust. It helps in browning the crust. So again, it will make the crust to be more browner than when fat has not been used. Helps in browning the crust. The other point, it prevents the bread from going bad, or it assists in preventing the bread from going bad. It assists in preventing the bread from going bad. So again, it is going to lengthen the shelf life of the bread. The other ingredient number 5, sugar. Sugar. Now under sugar we have 3 points, like it has 3 uses. The first obvious use, it gives flavor. It gives flavor to the product. So that is the obvious use of sugar. Tunajua sugar is sweet, iko na hiyo flavor, so it gives flavor to the product. Another point on sugar, it contributes to the final color of the product. It contributes to the final color of the product. We all know that when we heat sugar, it turns brown. So hiyo brown color ya dough products, pia sugar huwa imechangia. So it contributes to the final color of the product. And then the last point on sugar, it acts as food to the yeast. It acts as food to the yeast. Now remember, we have said on the conditions necessary for yeast to grow, one condition is food. Na tumesema food comes from starch, and the food is provided by flour and sugar. So that is why when we come to the sugar as an ingredient, one of the uses is providing food to the yeast. The other ingredient is salt, number 6. Salt. Now, salt has got its uses. The first obvious use, it gives flavor. So it gives flavor to the product. It gives flavor to the product. Another use, and this one is very important, another use of salt, it strengthens the gluten in the flour. It strengthens the gluten in the flour. Now, what is to strengthen? Tulisema gluten is formed when a liquid is introduced into flour, na ndio inafanya unga inakuwa elastic, unaweza stretch hiyo unga. So when we say it is strengthening, it is making sure that this gluten is not going to overstretch. So that is the function of salt, to control, or not to control here, to strengthen the gluten such that the gluten is not going to do what? To overstretch. The other use, number 3, the other point of salt, it has a controlling effect. It has a controlling effect in the development of yeast cells. It has a controlling effect in the development of yeast cells, ensuring that the yeast mixture ferments at a lower rate. It has a controlling effect in the development of yeast cells, ensuring that the yeast mixture ferments at a lower rate. Now, what am I trying to say here? Tumesema yeast grows. Kugrow inaendelea kumultiply. With the salt, it is going to control the rate of that multiplication to make sure that it is not going to multiply rapidly the way it is not supposed to. So the work of salt is also to control the multiplication of yeast cells. Another ingredient, number 7, eggs. Eggs. Now, when we talk about menu planning, tuko na very common term yenye inaitwa brush ama egg wash. Brush ama egg wash. And most of the time, tukizipata hizo mbili, bread roll is usually a possibility. Kwa nini? Because anytime we are making bread rolls, before tuziingize ndani ya oven, we must egg wash. Usually egg wash or milk wash. Now here, because we are talking about eggs, I'm going to use the example of egg washing. So we can use egg as an ingredient if required. It is not a must ingredient, but if you need to use it, you can use to improve the what? The flavor, the nutritive value, the texture, all those things. But now, when it comes to putting your yeast product into the oven, ukitaka itoke ikiwa iko shiny and nicely browned and shiny and glossy, then we usually do what? We egg wash, apply mayai. We write this. They give a rich flavor. Eggs, first point, they give a rich flavor. Another statement, they contribute in giving the product a rich color. They contribute in giving the product a rich color. So hiyo kuegg wash inafanya hiyo product inakuwa na hiyo an appealing color, very nice rich color. Ya mwisho, they assist in aeration. They assist in aeration. So we know that eggs are raising agents. Anytime we beat eggs, we incorporate air. So kama tunaitumia as an ingredient hapo kwa kupika, wacha kwa wash, then they will also assist in doing what? Making the product to raise, which is aerating the product. The last ingredient, which again is optional, number 8, fruits. Fruits, the last ingredient. They serve as enriching ingredients. They serve as enriching ingredients. We said every time we talk about enrich, to enrich is like to add on to. So it's not like we cannot eat bread rolls without fruits. We can. But if we have fruits, and when we talk about fruits here, we are talking about the dried fruits. Vitu kama raisins, sultanas, ndio tunasema. So they enrich, they add on to. So enriching in ingredients. And the other point, they add flavor. They add flavor. Now, those are the ingredients that we use in yeast products. My next subtopic, stages in bread making. Stages in bread making. Now, I know that the handouts that I sent you, iko stages in bread making, although they are written in prose form, kama paragraph. Now, I want you to capture what I'm going to give you now, because I'm going to give you the stages in number form. Unajua hii stage inaitwa hivi, and this is what happens. It has like 9 to 10 steps. Now, stage number 1 is known as fermentation. Fermentation. Fermentation hyphen. Yeast is dispersed in warm water or milk. Yeast is dispersed in warm water or milk with the addition of sugar. With the addition of sugar and left in a warm place. And left in a warm place. So that time when you take yeast, tulisema yeast haiwekwi straight kwa unga. You take your yeast, unaweka kwa bakuli ama kwa kikombe, unaweka maziwa ama maji or mixture, unazikoroga pamoja. Na unaweka a warm place ndio ianze kuform to bubbles. That is what we call fermentation. That is the first stage. Stage number 2, mixing. Kumix ni kuchanganya. Mixing. Now, when we talk about mixing, sasa tulichanganya liquid na yeast and some sugar. Now, when we come and take the flour and salt, we make a well at the center. Alafu tunamwaga hiyo ka liquid hapo. That is what I'm calling mixing. So we write this. A hole is made in the flour. A hole is made in the flour. And the liquid is poured. A hole is made in the flour. And the liquid is poured. Then sprinkled with a little flour. una sprinkle kaunga kadogo hapo juu, sprinkled with a little flour and left to bubble. So remember, the first step, ulimix tu ile yeast together with water or milk na sugar, haujiweka kwa unga. In the second stage, sasa umechukua ile unga yako na salt, you make a well at the center, then you pour the yeast ka mixture hapo and you sprinkle some flour on top. Unapeleka tena in a warm place until it starts bubbling. Step number 3, kneading. Kneading hii sasa ni ile kumix kama ile ya chapati. So kneading the mixture of flour and the yeast, the mixture of the flour and the dispersed yeast, the mixture of flour and the dispersed yeast is then kneaded to a soft dough. With the addition of the liquid. Now, why are we saying addition of the liquid? It is because sasa tunatengeneza a soft dough. So the liquid which we use to disperse the yeast haiwezi tosha. So sasa tutaanza kuongezea liquid, and our liquid here is either water or milk or a mixture of both. So tunaendelea kuweka mpaka itoshe. Write a point there down. Yeah, about kneading. We are still in step number 3. Now, if using hands, the knuckles, should be used to knead the dough. So when you are kneading yeast dough, we don't knead with the palm, you knead with the knuckles. So the knuckles should be used to knead the dough on a floured surface. So lazima sasa utatoa kwa bakuli, uwekelee kwa surface, uweke unga. So you knead on top of a floured surface. Nataka uweke hyphen. Ukishaandika hiyo statement yote, andika hyphen. So there is a reason as to why we are using knuckles and we are using it on a floured surface. That can be a question. So use the knuckles on a floured surface. Hyphen. This stretches the gluten. This stretches the gluten and disperses the yeast evenly throughout the mixture. This stretches the gluten and disperses the yeast evenly throughout the mixture. So the reason why we are using knuckles and we are kneading it on a floured surface is because we want to stretch the gluten and we want the yeast to be evenly distributed all over. Stage number 4, proving. Stage number 4 is proving. So that is now where we have the term prove. Proving. Now, this proving has got another name. Eka into brackets, benching. benching, hiyo into brackets, sijui hiyo inaweza kuwa term. So when you find benching ama bench inamaanisha prove. So proving ama benching hyphen, after the dough is made, it is put back to the basin. After the dough is made, it is put back into the basin. So whatever that you are using, inaweza kuwa basin, inaweza kuwa mixing bowl, whatever that you are using. So it may be put back, it is put back into the basin and covered, then put in a warm place. Covered, then put in a warm place. And left until it doubles in size. Put in a warm place and left until it doubles in size. So that is proving. Uiacha it double in size. Erase mpaka it double in size. Remember, when we've talked about the conditions necessary, condition moja ilikuwa ni time. Na tukasema this is now the first proving. This first proving inaweza take 1 hour to 1.5 hours. So unaiacha ikae hapo. That is benching or proving. Stage number 5. Knocking back. Kunock. Knocking back. What is to knock back? Ukichukua we need tena until irudi to the standard size. So knocking back has got a name. It's also known as punching. So weka into brackets, punching. So ujue you can find a term known as punch ama punching. Ujue that is knocking back. So knocking back into brackets, punching hyphen. The risen dough. Jason. Yes. Where are you? You're making noise. Yes. The risen dough is needed once more. The risen dough is needed once more on a flat surface. So when you take it from the warm place, when it has doubled in size, you don't usually knock it back in the mixing bowl. Unaitoa, unairudisha pale kwa surface. So again, you put flour on the surface and you start kneading again. So once more on a flat board, hyphen. So there is a reason for knocking back. Hyphen. This gives the dough an extra mixing. This gives the dough an extra mixing. This gives the dough an extra mixing and the right degree of firmness. The right degree of firmness. Naifanya inakuwa firm. FIRM. The right degree of firmness. Full stop. Step number 6. Molding. Molding pia inaitwa shaping. Mold ni kushape. So kama ulikuwa ni bread unatengeneza, unachukua bread tin unaweka, but before uweke kwa tin una shape hiyo bread into that shape. Kama bread tin yako ni round, kama ni rectangular, kama ni square, una form squares. Kama ni bread rolls unataka zikuwe za round, you form the two rounds. Now that is molding. You are shaping your product into the way you wish to come out looking like. So molding hyphen. The dough is divided the dough is divided into desired shapes. The dough is divided into desired shapes. Comma, if a tin is used, and this one is like, it is obvious. Obviously a tin will be used. Kama ni bread utaweka kwa bread tin, kama ni bread rolls utazipanga kwa the baking sheet. So either way a tin will be used. So if a tin is used, it is greased. So you grease it the same way we grease tin ya cake. We also grease the product. So if a tin is used, it is greased and left half filled with the dough. In a warm place. Left half with the dough in a warm place. So what is to half fill? Knock back ukashape. Sasa unataka kuziweka either kwa tin ama kwa baking sheet kama ni bread roll. So ukizipanga pale, we say uache space, usipanga kama zimeshikana. Ukiweka zimeshikana zitatoka kama scones, kama zimeshikana. But if it is bread rolls, you want individual bread rolls, unaziachia space. Kama ni bread, hiyo tin ya bread usiweke mpaka ijae, weka nusu. And why are we doing that? Because tunaenda kuacha tena ifanye nini? Erase tena. Now that raising is our next stage, number 7. So step number 7 inaitwa reproving. Now reproving is proving the second time. Reproving hyphen molding expels some gas. Molding expels some gas. So remember ilikuwa imedouble in size, umeichukua, you've knocked it back. Ukinock back, what does it mean? Umetoa ile air yenye ilikuwa trapped. So you've knocked back na pia umeshape. So in the process of knocking back and shaping it again, it means a lot of air has escaped. So for you to get this air back, now you are going to do what? To reprove a second time. So this reproving is also usually known as the second proving. So molding expels some gas. Full stop. Another statement. In this stage, the mixture is allowed to stand in a warm place. The mixture is allowed to stand in a warm place until the dough rises again. The mixture is allowed to stand in a warm place until the dough rises again. Then step number 8. So ikisha prove, what do you do? Now sasa ni kubake. Step number 8 inaitwa baking. Now when we talk about milk washing ama egg washing, it happens now in this stage after reproving. When you want to bake, ukiweka kwa oven, that's when you do what? You egg wash or milk wash na una bake. So hyphen, the dough is put into a hot oven. The dough is put into a hot oven for 30 to 40 minutes. The dough is put into a hot oven for 30 to 40 minutes. But the actual time depends on the size of the product. But the actual time depends on the size of the product. For example, kama ni bread roll, ile recipe ya bread roll yenye iko kwa book inakwambianga you bake for 15 minutes. So it depends how big is your product. Just another statement hapo kwa baking. Before baking, egg washing may be done. Before baking, egg washing may be done to aid in browning. Before baking, egg washing may be done to aid in browning. Then the last step, step number 9. Step number 9, testing the baked item. Testing, not tasting, T-E-S-T. Testing the baked item. Now, hii si kuonja. It's like confirming whether it is baked. So testing the baked item, hyphen. Before removing from the oven, test with a skewer. Before removing from the oven, test with a skewer. Full stop. Now, a skewer is a metallic equipment ya kuangalia kama products zimeiva, hata keki, but we can use a skewer, we can use a knife, we can use anything. Kudunga unatoa, kama iko safi, you know it is cooked. If it is not clean, you know it is not yet cooked. So those are the stages in bread making. On to our last subtopic for yeast products. Now, I think I taught you about cakes. Yes, I taught you about cakes. And when we looked at cakes, we looked at things that we called faults. Na tukasema faults ni challenges. So here we also have faults. Like you can bake your bread rolls, zitoke kama ziko ngumu, maybe zitoke kama zimepasuka, zitoke kama ziko bitter. Those are faults. In other words, the negative things that can happen to our product opposite to our expectation or contrary to our expectation. So, write the subtopic. Reasons for possible faults. Reasons for possible faults in yeast products. Reasons for possible faults in yeast products. Reasons. Okay. Fault number one. Fault number one. Closed texture. Closed texture. Now most of them zinafanana na zile za cakes. But the reasons might be different. So closed texture. Into brackets, so what are we calling closed texture? Into brackets, not reason. Haija raise, bado inakaa kushikana shikana na ushabake. So closed texture, not reason. So the reasons for that. So under that we write the dough insufficiently proved. The dough insufficiently proved. So when you did not prove your dough well, like you did not give it enough time to raise, that it will be having that gloss texture. Another reason, insufficiently kneaded dough. Insufficiently kneaded dough. So when it comes to kneading, again, you did not knead your dough appropriately. Insufficiently kneaded dough. Another reason for that, insufficient yeast used. Insufficient yeast used. So again, when you use a small quantity, and now here, that's where we emphasize on using the correct quantities, the quantities zenye zimeandikwa kwa recipe. Another one, oven too hot. Oven too hot. So again, if the oven is too hot, if you've not set the temperature, well, and we usually say that the standard temperature should be between 180 to 200, ama 180 to 220. So oven too hot. The other reason, too much liquid used. Too much liquid used. And the other one is too little liquid used. So when you use either too little or too hot, too much, just like the cake, you will get a closed texture. Fault number two. Fault number two, uneven texture. Uneven texture. What is being uneven? Uneven is lack of uniformity. Some parts zimeachana vizuri, zimeiva, some other parts bado ziko soggy, zingine ziko na zimeshikana shikana, so uneven texture. Under that, the reason, insufficient kneading. Insufficient kneading. The other one, overproving. Overproving. Remember, we have said kuna first proving na kuna second proving. First proving, we've said it takes between 1 hour to 1.5. Second proving, it takes up to 45 minutes. So ukisahau that ulikuwa unaendelea kuprove kitu, usahau, maybe the first proving it take like 3 hours, or the second proving, because hiyo ndio uko most likely kusahau, it take hata 2 hours instead of 45 minutes, then you get that. Another reason, oven too cool. Oven too cool. Anytime we say oven too cool, tunamaanisha you did not preheat the oven, ulisahau kuwasha oven, kupreheat. So the moment unaweka kwa oven, that's when you realize oven is supposed to be on. So unaiweka on hiyo time. So instead of zianze kupikwa na the appropriate temperature yenye ishafika 180, zinaanzia 0. So oven too cool. And the last reason on an even texture, insufficient knocking back of the dough. Insufficient knocking back of the dough. Remember tulisema in knocking back kuna reasons za knock back. It is to take out the air and improve the firmness. So if you do not do that, you're going to get an even texture. Utapata kuna zile parts ziko na the appropriate firmness na zingine which are still lagging behind. Another fault, coarse texture. Coarse texture, kukua coarse ni kukua rough. So coarse texture. Reasons for that, overproving. 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 Another one, dough not covered during proving. Dough not covered during proving. This one is very obvious. If you do not cover your dough, hata ile ya chapati, unga ya chapati ukose kucover, it forms skin hapo juu. So forming that skin means kuna another texture which has been introduced. So even after baking, itakuwa rough hapo juu. So dough not covered during proving. Another reason, too much water used in the dough. Too much water used in the dough. Number 4, too much salt used in the dough. Too much salt used in the dough. Too much yeast, not yeast, too much salt used in the dough. Na ya mwisho, insufficient kneading. Insufficient kneading. So again, you do not knead appropriately. You're going to get a coarse texture. Now, on to another fault. Wrinkled. Why would you get a bread product which is wrinkled? Kama ni bread roll, ziko wrinkled, ziko na wrinkles. So wrinkled, that is a fault. Get a wrinkled product. That one has only one reason. Overproving. Overproving. So if you let it to stay for too long. Another fault, sour taste. Sour taste. So when your bread roll is sour or your bread is sour, in other words, iko bitter kiikula. Reasons for that, reason ya kwanza, too much yeast. You've used excessive yeast. So too much yeast. Remember we said that yeast can alter the flavor of the product. So too much yeast. And the other reason, use of stale yeast. Stale, umetumia yeast yenye imeharibika, expired. Use of stale yeast. The last fault, broken crust. Broken crust. Umepika bread rolls zimepasuka pasuka juu. Broken crust. The first reason is overproving. Overproving. And the second reason is underproving in the second stage. Underproving in the second stage. So if during the second stage you did not allow it the 45 minutes, maybe uliprove for 20 minutes na ukaingiza ndani ya oven, zitapasuka. Kwa nini? Because the yeast had already expanded. It was in the process of expanding, and that was a warm temperature. Then all of a sudden you expose it to hot temperature, so it just bursts. So the crust has to break. So 2 reasons for broken crust. One is overproving, the other one is underproving in the second stage. Now, the last thing I'm going to talk about is storage of dough products. How do we store our bread, our donuts, our buns? Storage of dough products. Storage of dough products. Then we say this. They should always be stored in suitable containers or wrappers, na mostly ni wrappers. Kama bread mara nyingi inakuwaga kwa papers or wrappers. They should always be stored in suitable containers or wrappers at room temperature. Suitable containers or wrappers at room temperature. That is the first point. They should always be stored in suitable containers or wrappers at room temperature. Then point number 2. They should be stored in a freezer or fridge for a long stored in a fridge or freezer for a longer storage. And what is longer storage? If you are going, for example, to, let's say you've produced a lot. So if you are going to be keeping it for more than 5 days, then you have to either refrigerate or freeze. The last point on storage. Dough products are affected by a damp environment. They are affected by a damp environment. So in other words, do not keep them in damp environment. That's why we are saying it should be kept in containers and wrappers. Full stop. So that is the end of yeast and yeast products, which is what I wanted to cover today. So kama kuna maswali tuulize. I have said when you look at today's topic, najua umeona kuna part 1 yenye nimeweka hapo. I'm still going to forward the same kwa WhatsApp groups. Na ukiangalia kwa last week pia nimeweka hapo assignment 1. Maswali za assignment 1 ziko hapo, but I'm still going to forward them to your WhatsApp. So, assignment 1 mtasubmit Monday via email. Assignment 1 mtasubmit Monday and part 1 mtasubmit Friday. So assignment 1 Monday, part 1 Friday. So now we can ask questions if they are there. Any questions? Any questions? And next week I'll be talking about pastry products. I've been telling you that I have an entire topic on pastry, on a puff pastry, sweet pastry, all the types of pastry that we have. So next week, that is what we are going to be handling, pastry and pastry products. So if there are no questions, I'm going to end the class. The remaining time uanze kufanya assignment 1, part 1, then we meet next week. Now, I said